This might be the most popular packaged food product in America. Over 1 million of these are sold every single day. And if you're like me, you grew up eating a lot of Kraft mac and cheese. Plus, a lot of Lunchables, Jell-O, Kool-Aid, Capri Sun, Oscar Mayer hot dogs, and of course, Heinz ketchup. This is just a small sample, if you will, of the more than 200 global brands owned by Kraft Heinz, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that took two iconic food companies and merged them into one. The pairing seemed obvious. Combine Kraft's massive shelf presence with Heinz's cost-cutting machine to create a food super company.
At the time of the merger announcements, many investors and analysts are pretty convinced that this will be a good deal.
But the combined company unraveled almost immediately. Just 3 years in, Kraft Heinz had already lost billions. After deciding to break up for good in late 2025, the company's new CEO announced in February 2026 that it will hit pause on its plans to split. But is Kraft Heinz really fixable? This is the story of what it actually takes to run a portfolio of the biggest everyday food brands at scale, and what goes wrong when opposites attract. I'd like to first call into evidence this bar graph. It shows Kraft Heinz's annual operating profits, aka the revenue remaining after deducting operating costs, but before taxes. As you can see right here, just 3 years after it merged, Kraft Heinz had an operating loss of $10.2 billion in 2018. This probably goes without saying, but no one expected that, especially not from the two companies that basically established the playbook for how to manufacture and market modern American food. To understand what went wrong between these two, we have to unpack their histories and the differences that seemingly made them a perfect match. Both Kraft and Heinz were founded by entrepreneurs who started out really small. James L. Kraft sold his cheese out of a horse-drawn wagon, and H.J. Heinz sold bottles of homemade horseradish. For over a century, both companies grew, but in very different ways. In the early years, Kraft acquired other cheese and dairy brands like Velveeta and Philadelphia, while also developing its own products like the iconic Kraft mac and cheese and Kraft singles. Eventually, the company itself was acquired by a big tobacco firm called Philip Morris that had also acquired General Foods and later Nabisco. And after the incorporation of all three companies, that tobacco firm ultimately stuck with the name Kraft Foods, Inc. Heinz, on the other hand, focused on perfecting and selling its famous ketchup recipe to the masses, plus other condiments and canned food products like baked beans. It captivated consumers in the UK and made international expansion a top priority. So both companies successfully and respectively established themselves as household names. Kraft was this massive conglomerate of many different food brands, some with competing products, and Heinz focused on creating a complementary portfolio of sauces and condiments. What they did have in common was that they both focused on grocery store staples, and that's where the money lies. I mean, just take a look at your own pantry. Chances are you've stocked up on canned goods, instant noodles, and sauces like I have. These simple and seemingly boring foods aren't just beloved by consumers, they're recession-proof. That's why we created the Boring Food Business Playbook, 5 pantry staples that quietly made billions, as your personal guide for finding the next billion-dollar pantry opportunity, like Heinz ketchup. I just went through it myself, and the breakdown of how Heinz literally defined the taste of ketchup is a masterclass in building a moat. It's not just history though, it's a step-by-step look at finding the next billion-dollar staple within these 8 unexplored food categories that are wide open to entrepreneurs right now. Download our totally free playbook using the link in the description box, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. All right, back to the Kraft Heinz breakup saga. Before they merged into one company, Kraft was publicly traded and Heinz was privately owned by 2 investment firms. You've probably heard of one of them, Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire partnered with Brazilian private equity firm 3G Capital to buy Heinz for $28 billion in 2013. To make Heinz more profitable by making it more efficient, 3G quickly went to work on cutting its operational costs through a strategy called zero-based budgeting, which means that every dollar a company spends has to be re-justified from scratch every single year. According to the Wall Street Journal, the technique triggered sweeping cost cuts at Heinz, from eliminating hundreds of jobs to requiring employees to get permission to make color copies.
When these companies come in and they just cut costs, oftentimes within a few years, you will see some negative impact.
That's Professor Paul Nary, an expert on corporate mergers and acquisitions who teaches at the Wharton School of Business. I consulted him to learn more about the management of Kraft Heinz, starting with 3G's internal restructuring of Heinz, which looked promising.
Of course, everything that gets Warren Buffett's stamp of approval is amazing, and 3G Capital at that point is riding a wave of about 10 years of success as a company that goes in, buys public companies or invests in them and fixes them up.
You know what happens next. In 2015, Kraft and Heinz merged in a roughly $45 billion deal backed by Berkshire and 3G.
So why did they merge? Were both companies not doing well?
There are so many great efficiencies by merging two companies that are already pretty much in the same business.
Is Heinz ketchup more attractive to the consumer?
Well, it's only something you have on the side, whereas Kraft is like a main course. It's the more important, I would say, name.
Do we really need, 25 different types of Kraft macaroni and cheese? What they need to do is they need to be thinking outside the box.
It may have been the biggest deal in food industry history, but it wasn't exactly a merger of equals. The scales tipped more in favor of Team Heinz. This 2015 Forbes article notes a couple key aspects of the deal that quietly foreshadow its undoing. First, the investment firm shelled out $10 billion to sway Kraft shareholders to say yes to minority ownership. They'd get a 49% stake, Heinz's shareholders would get the other 51%. Then they installed Bernardo Hees, former Heinz CEO and 3G partner, as the merged company's new CEO. Both sides said they expected to save about $1.5 billion a year by 2017 as a result of the deal, and much of that savings would come from zero-based budgeting. So the logic to merge made sense.
The whole thought behind this is, first, let's combine these two companies and we'll achieve this great scale that's going to help us become a more competitive, better business. Second, we're going to implement all of these great cost savings that we know how to make with the help of 3G Capital. Now you have this great platform from which you can grow all of these great brands. And how can you go wrong when you have great, reputable, well-known brands and great businesses and amazing management and ownership like Warren Buffett and 3G Capital?
By early 2018, Kraft Heinz announced it had met and slightly exceeded its goal of cutting $1.7 billion in annual operating costs. But remember, that same year, its operating income fell to negative $10 billion. So how did Kraft Heinz get into such a bad financial spot in such a short amount of time? Similar to its strategy at Heinz, as I noted earlier, 3G cut thousands of jobs and eliminated office amenities like snacks, plus its investment in research and development took a huge hit. The New York Times reported that before the merger, Kraft spent $149 million on R&D. In 2017, the combined company spent just $93 million. According to the Wall Street Journal, the company said greater efficiency would free up resources to reinvest in its brands. But over time, those extreme cuts eroded company innovation and morale. It also created extra complexity in an already complex conglomerate.
And in this case, you had a company with, hundreds of brands across hundreds of countries in dozens of different categories. And every year, by the way, you're trying to manage your capital allocation across these brands and portfolios and countries. It becomes a very complicated business.
On top of that, shoppers in the US were becoming more health conscious. One 2018 survey found that 7 in 10 consumers would be willing to give up a familiar favorite product for one that did not contain artificial ingredients. Analysts started to question how Kraft's products would perform in the international markets that the merger with Heinz had opened up.
Heinz has already been sort of improved operationally and optimized, but Kraft has this main issue of old sort of brands that people don't get excited about. They aren't, as the kids would say, on trend when it comes to what gets people excited when it comes to food and beverage.
So basically, under 3G's leadership, Kraft Heinz prioritized cutting operational costs over investing in growth at a time when consumer preferences were changing. And that in itself was a recipe for disaster.
They need innovation to grow. They need something new. And this is exactly what they're not getting with zero-based budgeting. And they're sort of writing out their stable sales while the consumers get progressively less and less excited about their portfolio of brands. We do see some innovation, but clearly not enough to move the needle, especially in the portfolio of Kraft.
The result was flatlining revenues from 2016 to 2017 to 2018. By 2019, the writing was on the wall for Warren Buffett, who publicly admitted,
"We overpaid for Kraft. The business does not earn more just because you pay more for it."
That admission, along with a $15.4 billion write-down, caused Berkshire's stake in the company to plunge nearly 50%.
Now you're finally seeing that the company is in trouble, and now the investors get really worried.
The New York Times called the mega merger a mega mess, and the Wall Street Journal even wrote an entire article on what General Mills could teach Kraft Heinz about keeping its product lineup fresh while improving margins at the same time. From then on, the relationship between Kraft and Heinz was officially on the rocks. The company was able to rebound slightly in the years that followed, but it still wasn't the powerhouse it promised to be. But was it that Kraft and Heinz were a wrong fit from the start? Or was it in how they were managed as a singular company that strained the relationship?
It's a little bit of both, I think. It's very hard to kind of make everything work well together and optimize the system when there are already factors in there working against you, or there are incompatibilities, again, between potentially the two companies, or let's say imposing a cost-cutting system on a culture that's not compatible with it.
And maybe the real incompatibilities weren't only between Kraft and Heinz, but between 3G Capital and Berkshire Hathaway as the partnership behind the match. See, Warren Buffett is known for investing in American food companies, so obviously Kraft Heinz fit the bill. But Buffett's partnership with 3G Capital was a departure from his usual playbook. Private equity firms like 3G Capital tend to buy a company and then make a lot of big changes really quickly to raise its value before they eventually sell it. Berkshire's approach to ownership is much more hands-off because it isn't in the business of flipping companies. Instead, it wants to hold on to them for a really long time. In September 2025, Kraft Heinz officially announced its plans to separate. Warren Buffett responded to the news, telling CNBC he was
disappointed. It certainly didn't turn out to be a brilliant idea to put them together, but I don't think taking it apart will fix it.
The plan was to split the company into two firms. One would focus on its fast-growing categories, the other on its slower-growing categories. But as we were making this video, Kraft Heinz's new CEO reversed the plans, saying its challenges are fixable. Still, Kraft Heinz stocks are down by about 70% since the merger closed in 2015. And that could ultimately sway Berkshire Hathaway to sell its final stake in Kraft Heinz. Because even one of the most respected holding companies in the world has to admit when it's time to let go. If you liked this case study, check out my friend Tori's video on the real reason Starbucks is closing stores. And don't forget to download the boring food business playbook, 5 pantry staples that quietly made billions. Subscribe to The Hustle, and I will see you in the next one.